Hello and welcome to the programme. Well, it's bringing together 40 countries, but many fear it could end up just being a festival of talk rather than a conference of historic change. Right now, the Palestinian President, Mahmoud Abbas, is having his turn at the White House ahead of the Annapolis meeting on the Middle East. Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Olmert has already been. He emerged a few hours ago saying this time it's different. But whatever pledges come out of Annapolis, it's what happens on the ground that counts. Jewish settlements in the occupied West Bank will be one of the key issues. But before the talks even begin, settlers are making their position clear. Well, several thousand settlers are protesting outside Ehud Olmert's official residence in Jerusalem. Our correspondent, David Chater, is there now. David, so what exactly are the settlers saying?
Well, tonight, the settlers movement and the right wing are demonstrating here as near as possible to the Prime Minister's official residence in the centre of Jerusalem. And they hope their voice of protest will be heard loud and clear in Washington tonight. They say they've got several red lines. There's been a mixture of messages here, all with the same theme. To President Bush, they're saying, destroy terrorism first, not the state of Israel. And to Ehud Olmert, the Israeli Prime Minister, they're saying, to divide our land is to defy God. We've taken a closer look at the issues involved.
Construction of Israeli settlements in the West Bank has continued under every government since the occupation began. The population of Jewish settlers now numbers more than 450,000, including East Jerusalem. Based on the current growth rate, the settler population would have doubled in the next 12 years. But the Israeli government is set to announce a freeze on all expansion, even for so-called natural growth, at the Middle East conference in Annapolis. The Israelis have made promises before to freeze all settlement activity in the occupied West Bank, promises that have been broken. This time, for Annapolis, they're characterizing it as a concession. It's not. It's an obligation under the first stage of the roadmap. The UN's former Secretary General, Kofi Annan, said the consolidation of the Israeli settlements on occupied land was the main reason for the mistrust and frustration felt by ordinary Palestinians, which often find their outlet in violence.
It's important to put a stop to this, and I hope very much that we have this freeze and that Israeli will live up to their promises.
The Jewish settlers see the West Bank as their God-given birthright. They do not believe in the roadmap or the two-state solution as the way to resolve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict.
He's equating the struggle against the terrorist that wants to explode in a crowded coffee shop or a discotheque in Tel Aviv, killing hundreds or dozens of people, with my daughter, for instance, that all she wants is to build her home next to mine. That's an obscene comparison, an obscene equation.
The Jewish settlers think the Annapolis meeting will solve nothing. They say they will gather support and fight any promise made by the Israeli government.
David, observers say that both Ehud Olmert and Mahmoud Abbas are in weak positions. I mean, how much pressure are they both under to come back with some results from the conference?
Well, the right wing and the settlers movement are saying here tonight that there should be no freeze on settlement activity in the occupied West Bank. But they're also building up protest against any other concessions. The settlers movement don't believe in a roadmap. They don't believe the fact that they should withdraw from the occupied West Bank. They say they've got a biblical birthright to establish those settlements. They're also saying no to any division of Jerusalem, no to any unilateral withdrawal. Now, it's easy to say that Ehud Olmert must come back and make some concessions to kickstart the peace process after Annapolis. But he's also got to listen to this voice of protest here, because it could threaten his own fragile coalition government. There are various red lines that the parties in the coalition do not want him to cross. But at the same time, he has to make those concessions to the Palestinians if this peace process is going to be successfully launched with final status negotiations from the launch pad of Annapolis. So a very difficult line for Ehud Olmert to tread, and they're hoping here tonight that this voice will be heard loud and clear by him in Washington and Annapolis.
OK, David, thank you very much indeed. And those settlers aren't the only ones against the conference. Thousands of Orthodox Jews gathered at the Wailing Wall in Jerusalem a few hours ago to pray that the talks will fail. They're determined that Jerusalem will not be divided and argue that partition will only worsen the Arab-Israeli conflict. In Gaza, Hamas held a conference of their own to counter Annapolis, which they were not invited to. The deposed Palestinian Prime Minister says his group will not cede an inch of Palestine and it will never recognize Israel.
They're expressing the conviction of the Palestinian people that the Annapolis conference is useless. Consequently, any decisions this conference might reach, which affect the rights and principles of the Palestinian people and nation, will not be binding for our people. They will be binding only for those who signed them.
And amid all this, little changes in Gaza. An Israeli airstrike near Beit Hanun killed one member of Hamas and injured two other people. The Israeli army said it hit a group of Palestinians it says were firing mortar shells into Israel. Tanks were also seen destroying buildings in the northern Gaza Strip. Israel says they were used as cover by Palestinians launching rockets across the border. Well, one thing still missing for Tuesday's meeting in Annapolis is an agenda that both Israelis and Palestinians can agree on. Publicly, negotiators say they are making progress, although Al Jazeera has learned there may be further delays before a text is actually issued. Well, let's cross over to Dave Marish in our Washington News Center. Dave, can we expect a joint statement within the next few hours, though?
Well, Darren, that's a good question. The negotiators continue their shuttle between hotels here in Washington, trying to hammer out a text that can be presented at the meeting tomorrow. As those discussions continue, President Bush has been meeting with the main players. He's already had talks with Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Olmert. He is about to see Mahmoud Abbas in just a few hours. Al Jazeera's senior Washington correspondent Rob Reynolds has been following events and joins us now live from close to the White House. Rob?
Well, Dave, actually about 7 minutes ago, just as our program went on the air, I was able to observe from this perch overlooking the White House the motorcade of Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas entering the White House grounds. So we can assume, I believe, that President Bush and the Palestinian president are meeting as we speak. As you mentioned, of course, Bush has already sat down with Ehud Olmert. During that meeting, President Bush said he is optimistic for the prospects of peace. The Annapolis conference, in the days leading up to it, expectations have been pitched quite low. However, we are hearing from at least one senior member of the Palestinian delegation that the two sides are inching forward and making some progress, at least in terms of framing the issues.
A flurry of diplomatic activity in Washington overnight Sunday and early Monday appears to have paid off. There had been no sign of a jointly agreed document that Israel and the Palestinians could present at Annapolis. Then, out of the blue, came this from one of President Mahmoud Abbas's advisors.
This is the document. This will be the paper which will be agreed upon today and will represent a kind of a breakthrough and will enable the conference tomorrow to declare success and to show to the world that the conference is really a launching process for the negotiations that will start after tomorrow.
But other Palestinian sources with the delegation seem more cautious about the existence of the joint document, saying Israel continues to reject key points. A joint document would have been one of the topics discussed by President Bush and Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Olmert when they met at the White House Monday.
Thanks for coming to the Annapolis conference. I'm looking forward to continuing our serious dialogue with you and President of the Palestinian Authority to see whether or not peace is possible. I'm optimistic. I know you're optimistic, and I want to thank you for your courage.
This time it's different because we are going to have lots of participants in what I hope will launch a serious process of negotiations between us and the Palestinians.
President Bush is also meeting Abbas at the White House. And on Tuesday, the one-day Annapolis conference with over 40 nations and organizations taking part formally begins.